Masechet Ketubot, Daf Kof Aleph. We're at the Mishnah on the bottom of Kof Amud Bet. The Mishnah is about women who do not deserve their Ketubah. Hamema'enet, Hashiniya veha Ailonit. And lahen ketubah velo perot velo mezonot velo belaot. So the following three women do not get a ketubah payment. They also says they do not get fruit. Now, actually, it's the man who enjoys the produce of land that the woman brings into the marriage, but these are penalties to her. So therefore, one possible interpretation is that the produce here means that which she gets in place of him getting the produce, which is that the husband has to redeem his wife in case she is captured. He has to pay for that, and in turn, he enjoys the produce of her land. So it says velo perot. It's actually a reference to the fact that he does not have to spend his own money to redeem his wife should she get captured. And also mezonot, he does not have to give her sustenance. And when the marriage ends, usually the wife is permitted to take out the clothing that she brought into the marriage. She can take it out, and it's been used. So now they're worn out clothing, but she, even though the husband used them during the marriage, she gets to take the worn out clothing back with her. They're worth something. So all these items, the following three women do not get. Who are they? Hamema'enet. This is a young orphan girl whose father passed away, or whose brother or mother marry her off. And then as a minor, she protests the marriage. She says, I don't want to be married to this guy. So number one, it's not a full marriage. It's not a deoraita marriage, because only a father can marry off a minor, not the brother and the mother. Nevertheless, the rabbi said it's a good idea to marry her off so that she's an orphan and people will not take advantage of her if she has a husband to protect her. But if she refuses, so it was not really a full marriage to begin with, and she decided to leave. So therefore, the husband, he's kind of doing her a favor. He's getting a wife also, but therefore, since she decided to leave, he does not have to pay her anything. Okay, we understand that. Hashiniya, this is the forbidden relations that are not mentioned in the Torah, but rather are secondary forbidden relatives that are asur midrabanan. For example, like one's grandmother. All these, if someone does marry such a prohibited relation, the marriage is a valid marriage, but it's just prohibited. So we want to penalize the woman and encourage her not to enter the marriage and to leave. And therefore, since there's prohibited marriage, the penalty is she gets none of these payments. And the third one is Ailonit, a woman who cannot have children. She's underdeveloped. And the man there says, I married you thinking that you were childbearing, and I wanted to have children. And so this is a kind of a mekach ta'ut. It's a marriage on false premises. And so therefore you can, in a way, annul it retroactively. And so therefore, if there was never a marriage, or the marriage was under false pretenses, he does not have to pay the normal payouts that would be for a regular marriage. All right, so that's the three cases here. There are some smaller differences between them, as we will see in the Gemara. Regarding the third one, Ailonit, if the husband knew from the beginning of the marriage that she was an Ailonit and she would not be able to have children, and yet agreed to marry her anyway, then that's a different story. Then he can't say that the marriage is under false pretenses. In that case, he has to certainly pay the Ketubah. Almana lekohen gadol, gerusha v'chalusa lekohen hediot, mamzeret untina l'Yisrael, Ba'at Yisrael natinu mamzer, yesh lam ketubah. Unlike the three women above, the following marriages, the man does have to pay the ketubah, even though they are forbidden marriages. These are all forbidden from the Torah. So unlike the sheniyot that are only from midrabanan. So if a widow marries a kohen gadol, or a divorcee marries, or a chalutza marries a regular kohen, or a woman who's a mamzeret or a netina, netina is a descendant of the Gibeonites who converted under false pretenses, and then they said they can't marry in to Israel. If they do marry, this is in isur lav, not isur karet, so the marriage would be valid according to most opinions, but prohibited. Or the other way around, if she is a full Jew, but she marries a man who is a Natin or Mamzer, in all these cases, the marriage is valid, it is prohibited, but there is a ketubah. So this is interesting. How come in the case of a prohibited marriage prohibited only midrabanan, there's no ketubah, but in Doraita there is a ketubah? And so one explanation is that since they are assumed midoraita, that itself is enough of a hindrance that people will stay away from it. But the words of the rabbis need extra emphasis, and so that's why the rabbis impose a penalty on Isur Midrabanan. The Torah already has its own strength, its own authority, its own penalties, and so it doesn't need added penalties of the rabbis. Also, if someone does marry a Shiniyah, the children are still okay, so there's no other penalty, whereas in these cases, like Gerushat Kohen, the child will be a halal, and so those penalties also will prevent people from staying married. So the Drabanan one actually needs a little bit more bolstering for its authority. Okay, now regarding the first one, the Mema'enet, Rav Tan is machloket. Rav Tane, Ketanayos abeget, en la ketubah, v'chol sheken Mema'enet. The Mishnah actually only mentioned the Mema'enet, the minor girl who decides to refuse the marriage as a minor, and if she does that, she has a right to. The marriage never takes place. Retroactively, it's annulled, it's like nothing happened. So therefore, there would certainly be no ketubah. The question is, what if instead, as a minor, the husband gives her a get? Well, that also will stop the marriage, but not retroactively. So the question is were they actually married, and now the get will stop it? Would that be the same? So Rav understands, or he has a Tane, either he had this a version of the Mishnah or a Braita that said this, or this is understanding of the Mishnah. He understands that a ketana who is given a get, she also does not get a ketubah, meaning it was really never a marriage at all. So since it's only Drabanan marriage, only Drabanan get, but basically no marriage, no ketubah, and all the more so mema'enet, because in that case, retroactively, the whole thing is annulled. Certainly she wouldn't get a ketubah. Also in that case, she's the one that's leaving, so that is less responsibility for him to have to pay her when she's the one that wants to leave. But Shemuel says, Shemuel Tane, Mema'enet en la ketubah, avayosa beget, yesh la ketubah. Shemuel, on the other hand, has a Tanaitic source that explains the Mishnah to say that if she refuses, only then she doesn't get a ketubah because she's the one that decided to leave. But if he gives her a get and the man decides while she's still a minor that he doesn't want to be with her anymore and gives her a get, then that's not her fault, that's his fault. So then he does have to pay a ketubah. And so in that case, it's also not retroactively annulled. Sounds like there is actually some marriage there, even as a minor. Okay, now that's what Shemuel said. Shemuel, who quoted this baraita, actually agrees with something else he himself said, which is the same thing. So Shemuel not only quoted a baraita as such, happens to be that is his personal opinion as well, that a woman who refuses does not get a ketubah minor, but a man who gives his minor wife a get does have to pay a ketubah. Now, Shemuel also said something else. Mema'enet lo pesala min achin velo pesala min kehuna yosa beget pesala min achin u pesala min kehuna. Other differences between mema'enet and get is if a minor refuses her marriage, then it's as if she was never married, and if she wanted to afterwards marry that husband's brother, she's permitted to. Normally, a woman cannot marry her husband's brother except for the scenario of yibum. But here, even if her former husband is alive and well, she is permitted to marry her husband's brother because it's as if she was never married to that first guy. Also, she can marry a Kohen. even though she was married. They did a wedding ceremony, but it was not with her father. It was with her mother or her brother who agreed to it. So therefore, it was only midrabanan. She refused it, retroactively annulled it. It's as if nothing happened. She can marry a kohen. However, on the other hand, Shemuel is also saying all this. If she got a get from her husband, then it's as if she was in fact married to him, and now is a divorcee. So in that case, she cannot go and marry the husband's brother, nor can she marry a kohen. She is considered a divorcee. Furthermore, a minor who refuses does not have to wait 3 months, whereas if she gets a get, she does have to wait 3 months. Now, the waiting 3 months is normally required in order to figure out who the father is. So that would for sure be required if she's of childbearing age. Now, this girl is a minor, so she's not of childbearing age, so really she wouldn't have to wait 3 months at all. Nevertheless, the rabbi said, let's make all women who are married wait 3 months, because we don't want to distinguish between one case that she could be pregnant, a case she couldn't be pregnant. Let's not distinguish at all, because people will make mistakes. So that's why if she gets a get, she has to wait 3 months anyway, even though she's a minor. But Shemuel says if she refuses, then she really was never married, and there's no chance she's pregnant because she's a minor, and she was never married. Therefore, they would not apply that rabbinic law. Okay, so Shemuel said all that. Question on Shemuel: Mai kamash malan? What exactly is Shemuel even teaching us? Tanena kulahu. We learned all these things already in Mishnah in Yevamot. If a minor girl refuses her husband after her mother marries her off, he is permitted to then marry her close relatives. Normally, if a man marries a woman, he is never allowed to then be with his wife's close relatives. But in this case, it's allowed because retroactively they're never married, and she is permitted to his relatives, like his brother, and she can go and marry a kohen. On the other hand, if he gives her a get, even though she's a minor, nevertheless, that is enough of a marriage, and that she is a divorcee, and he cannot marry any. He's prohibited to her relatives. She is prohibited to his relatives, and she cannot marry Kohen because she's a divorcee. So he still looked. The Mishnah said everything that Shemuel just said. Why would Shemuel bother repeating something that's in the Mishnah? The answer is Shemuel repeated that because he wanted to add this law that's not in the Mishnah, that a woman who gets a get does have to wait 3 months, even though a mima'enet does not have to wait 3 months, was not in the Mishnah. So Shemuel's adding that. All right. Now that we have this machlok between Rav and Shemuel. Again, Rav says that the man does not have to pay a ketubah to the minor wife, not if she's mema'enet, and not if she gets a get. There's no marriage there, nothing to worry about. It doesn't matter if she left or he divorced her. Whereas Shemuel makes a distinction. If she left, that's retroactively annulled. There's no marriage. But if he gives a get, then he does have to pay a ketubah. So it seems this machloket between Amoraim is parallel to a machloket between two Tanaim. Lema ketanae. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, en maaseh ketana kelum, ven ba'ala zakai b'mesiata, velo maaseh yadea, velo b'afrat nedareha, ve'eno yorsha, ואינו מתטמא לה, כללו של דבר, אינה כאשתו לכל דבר, אלא שצריכה מיעון. According to Rabbi Eliezer, a minor who is married, that marriage act is not anything, right? The act of a minor does not count for anything. She is not authorized to marry. She doesn't have enough da'at. And so, and if they do this, if she does do a marriage ceremony of some kind, nevertheless, because they're not deoraita married, the husband does not have a right to the things that she finds. Normally, a husband would have the fines would get the fines that his wife should collect goes to him, but not in this case. Nor with the wages. Normally, a husband gets his wife's wages in return for paying her sustenance, but when she's a minor, the husband does not get her wages and does not have a right to undo her vows like a husband does, because they're not really married. And if she would die, he would not inherit her, and if he's a kohen, he cannot become tameh to her. This is the basic summary. She is not like her wife for anything. But the only thing that they do have is that there's some connection enough that she would require to do a refusal if her mother or brother married her off and she wants to leave. She has to go through this process of saying, I don't like him, I want to leave, in order to go and marry somebody else. We're not going to just let her marry someone else. So there is something she has to do, but for everything else, basically, she's not married. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yoshua, on the other hand, says that the marriage of a minor actually is something. And the husband is entitled to anything that she finds and her earnings, and he can annul her vows. And he can inherit her. And if he's a kohen and she dies, he must attend to her burial, and he becomes tameh. And the summary of the matter is that she is his wife for all things, except that normally a wife needs a get. In this case, she doesn't have to get a get; she can just do the refusal, and then she can go and remarry. So according to Rabbi Yoshua, it is a real marriage for almost everything. So Rav damar Rabbi Eliezer, Shmuel damar Rabbi Yoshua. So it seems that Rav would agree with Rabbi Eliezer, and that's the reason why Rav would say, even if he gives her a get, he doesn't have to pay her ketubah, because it was never a real marriage, and he did not collect anything. He did not get any benefits from her during this marriage, and so when he gives a get, he doesn't have to give her a ketubah. So that makes sense. That would be consistent. And Shemuel would follow to be Yoshua, who says it is a real marriage. If she does mi'un, then retroactively it was annulled, so then you don't have to pay ketubah. But if it's a get, then they were married. He got all the benefits during the marriage, and he would have to pay the ketubah. So that would make sense, but we'd rather not pigeonhole the Amoraim that they have to be like one only or like another Tana. So we reject it and say not necessarily. Alibad Rabbi Eliezer kol amala pelige. Within Rabbi Eliezer, who says it's not a marriage, certainly there, Rav and Shemuel would agree that, according to the Rabbi Eliezer, she would not get a ketubah ever, not even after a get. So that's not what they're talking about. Ki peligi alibad Rabbi Yoshua. Rather, Rav and Shemuel, their controversy took place within the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua. Shemuel says, I follow Rabbi Yoshua, it is a real marriage, and therefore, if he gives her a get, he has to pay a ketubah. Mema'enet is different, because that's retroactively annuls the marriage. V'Rav ad kan lakama Rabbi Yoshua hatam ela medida ledideh, ava medideh ledida la. And Rav will say, I also agree with Rabbi Yoshua. But Rabbi Yoshua, he only said that the items that go from her to him are obligated. For example, her wages that she gives to him, yes, that goes from her to him. But the items that he has to give to her, like the payout of the ketubah, no, Rabbi Yoshua did not say anything about that. So Rav says, that's why I think that the man does not have to pay the ketubah, not in the case of mema'enet, and not in the case even where he gives her a get. All right. Now, Velo Belaot, the Mishnah mentioned that these women in this list do not get the worn out clothing at the end of this marriage. So we have a statement about that. Amar le Rav Huna bar Chiya le Rav Kana amat lan mishemeh de Shmuel. Rav Huna, the son of Chiya, told Rav Kahana that Rav Kahana said the following in the name of Shmuel. So we'll call this Rav Kahana's principle. Who said, Lo shanu ela nichse melog, aval nichse son barzel it la. When the Mishnah says that she does not receive the worn out documents, the worn out clothing, that's only talking about clothing that she brought in as nichse melog, meaning that she retains the ownership of that clothing. And she gets it back as is at the end of the marriage, whether it's worth more or worth less. That she does not get back. However, if it's nichse son barzel, that means guaranteed property. That means it's assessed at the time of the marriage. This is worth $100. And then, even if it gets worn out and he uses it during the marriage, she gets back the same $100, whether it goes up or down in value. That's why it's called guaranteed property, like barzel, like iron. That she does get, so she does get paid the son barzel. Now this is interesting, as we're going to see, because there is a reason to argue the other way around, that the nichse melog, she totally owns, it's totally hers, even though he controls it during the marriage, but she owns it, so it makes sense she would take it back out with her, whereas nichse son barzel are basically transferred to him. He has to pay the equivalent amount at the end of the marriage, but the items themselves he totally owns. So there'd be more reason to think that she does, that these women, whose marriages are either prohibited or retroactively annulled, would get the nichse melog that they already had, rather than the other way around. Okay, but now we're going to analyze the statement. Have ba Rav Papa ahaya. Rav Papa asked, on which of the three women was Rav Kana talking about? He seems to be saying all of them, but it's a problem. So we're going to end up saying he's just talking about one of these women. Which one? If we're talking about the minor girl who refuses the marriage, well, if this clothing is still in existence, it's here, even if it's worn out, well, then both of them should get it, because this mema'enet, she basically was never married. And so if she brought in these different pieces of clothing and they're still around, she should be able to take them away, no matter if they're melog or nichse son barzel. And if they're not around, they're so completely worn out that they don't exist anymore, and so then would he be required to pay her the amount, the compensation for it? No, she wouldn't take either of them. Just like he doesn't pay a ketubah, she's the one that decided to leave, so he is not responsible for paying for anything. So it would be all or nothing, and there would be no reason to make a distinction in the case of mema'enet. So let's try again. Ela ailonit. The Ailonit, who was now not married, cannot bear children, and so he doesn't want to remain with her. He says this is a marriage based on false premises. Now, if they are around, and so we annul the marriage, these are hers. So either one, she should be able to take with her. Whatever remains, she should take. And if they're no longer in existence, then we would say the opposite, that's how I was arguing before, that the opposite would make more sense. The nichse melog that she brings in as is and retains ownership. So since she owns it, it's in her possession, so she should be able to take the nichse melog, whereas the other way around, nichse son barzel de la b'shuta kaime let la, whereas the son barzel, which are not in her possession, she gave it up and said, I'm just going to take the value. There, she should not receive the compensation. So if you're going to require compensation for anything, it should be that he should be required to compensate her for nichse melog. If they're no longer around and he just wore them out and destroyed them, then he should pay for the nichse melog, not the son barzel. Should be the other way around. Now, why is Ailoni different from mema'enet? If they're both retroactively undone, the difference is that the mema'enet, she decides that she's going to leave, so he has less responsibility to take care of her. Whereas Ailonit, he's the one that says, I don't want to be married to you anymore. I always wanted a woman who bears children. So since he is stopping the marriage and annulling it, therefore he is somewhat responsible. Fine, even if he's somewhat responsible, it shouldn't be in this direction, it should be the opposite direction. So we don't like that either. Ela ashiniya. Rather, the only case that Rav Kana can make sense is when a man marries, say, prohibited relative, midrabanan. And the rabbis, they made a kanas, a penalty on both parties, And so what they did is this is how it works on both. So lidida bedide, they made a penalty on her with regard to his obligations to her, meaning normally he is required to pay for milog, properties that were worn out. But because we want to penalize her for entering into this prohibited marriages, we say you, the woman, do not get what normally would be you would be entitled to. And the same as the other way around. Uldide bedida, we penalize him with regard to things that she should bring to him, and that would be the nichse son barzel that she brings into the marriage that normally the husband would keep the items. So we want to penalize him and say, you know what, this thing that you should have been able to keep, because you entered this prohibited marriage, we're going to give it to her. So in the end, she does get something that that belongs to him, and he gets something that belongs to her. So even though they're both actually getting something that they wouldn't have normally gotten, but they're also both losing something that they should have gotten. And so that is even though there is some gain, but the point is that we're making it different, and each are receiving some loss. And when they come and complain, we'll say, well, this is a penalty. You should not have entered this prohibited marriage to begin with. Amar Rav Shimi bar Ashe, Shema mina mid Rav Kana Ayla le Gelima Karna Have Vela Mechase La Ve'azil Ad Debale. Shimi bar Ashe says we can learn from this statement of Rav Kana that if the woman, brings some kind of cloak into the marriage after they're already married, so they're already married, and then she receives some item she brings in. This is considered karna. It's considered the capital, and he may not use it until it gets destroyed. Just like if a wife brings some land into the marriage, so he can benefit from the produce, but he cannot take from the capital. So too, this item, this cloak, is considered capital, and he's not allowed to wear it out, so he cannot use it. Okay, so that's what Rav Shimi bar Ashe says. Based on Rav Kana, we argue. Hold on, Rav Nachman perahave. Rav Nachman said no, the opposite. That the cloak is like produce, meaning the use of the cloak. That's the produce of the cloak. And so just like you can use land and get produce out of it, so too the husband should be able to use the cloak. So we answer that Rav Nachman Peliga. You're right, Rav Nachman does say that, but Rav Nachman argues against Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana thought that the cloak is itself, and its usage is part of the capital, so he can't use it up. Whereas Rav Nachman said that the usage is its produce, and therefore he can use it. All right, next part of the Mishnah said, and la Ketubah, these three women do not receive a ketubah. Amar Shemuel, lo shanu ela maneh matayim aval tosefet yesh lahen. When the Mishnah says that these three women do not receive their ketubah payment, that's only we're talking about the baseline payment of 100 or 200. But if he added more, let's say he said, I'm going to give you also another 1,000 at the end of the marriage, they do get that, because that's basically a gift, right? He's saying that I want to give it to you, and showing my appreciation of you. And so even though the marriage ends and she's an Ailonit or whatever reason, so she doesn't deserve the base amount, the base required amount, but if he wants to give a gift, so he gives a gift and he still has to pay it. That supports the statement of Shemuel. Anytime that says she does not get a ketubah, for example, the minor who refuses and other ones in that same list, they don't get the base amount, but the added amount they do get, right? So this adult who did this marriage with the minor, and he added more, he wanted to show how much he loves her, and so he gives her this extra 1,000. He has to pay that no matter what, even if she is the one that refuses. The Baraita continues and says another important law. Nashim shamru chamim yosot shelo b'ktuvah. This is stronger language. The language over here was she doesn't get a ketubah. Here it says they must leave without a ketubah. They have to be divorced without a ketubah. Kegon overet adat v'chabroteha, like a woman who doesn't follow the basic practices of Jewish women. That list of people that violate these laws, so they cannot remain married and they leave without a ketubah. In lahen tosefet v'kol sheken maneh matayim. They do not even get the added amount, and certainly they don't get the base amount. Right? They're different because they are violating laws, and so purposely ruining their marriages. They don't get anything at all. And furthermore, a woman who is divorced and leaves because of a bad reputation that she committed adultery, then she can only take the nichse melog that were there, that she owns it, so you can't take that away from her, but she doesn't get any other payments at all. That's it. But you can't take away what the land that she brought into the marriage in the first place. This baraita would support Rav Huna. Damar Rav Huna zinta lo hifsida belaoteha kayamin. He said that even if she does commit adultery, she still does not lose the right to the clothing that she brought in. If they're still there, she can take them, even if they're worn out. She takes that with her. Even if she committed adultery, she doesn't get penalized to that extent. Now we have a baraita that was said in front of Rav Nachman that says if she commits adultery, she does lose her right to any existing clothing, which this is a contradiction, because here this baraita and the statement of Rav Huna said she doesn't lose it, but now this baraita that's quoted in front of Rav Nachman say that if she committed adultery, she does lose the worn out clothing. Amale imhizinta keleha mi zenai. So Rav Nachman said to the Tana who was reciting this baraita, that doesn't make any sense. Just because the woman committed adultery, did her clothing commit adultery? Meaning, right? You can't, we penalize her with appropriate penalties, but it doesn't mean that she loses things that she owns. So she should still be able to take out of the marriage the clothing that she brought in. And so we say, you're right. We should teach the opposite. So actually, Rav Nachman said you should teach the opposite baraita. You should add a law to the baraita. She does not lose the clothing, the worn out clothing that she brought into the marriage. Amar bar Hana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zo dibre Rabbi Menachem se timta. Rabbi Yochanan says, actually, you don't have to change the baraita. This original baraita that says that she does not get the clothing, there is an opinion like that. That's the opinion of Rabbi Menachem, the one who's an author of anonymous teachings. So this is a kind of paradox, because now we know his name. If he's always anonymous, we wouldn't know his name. Okay, but the point is that Rabbi Menachem said many things, and his statements are considered halakha l'maaseh, so therefore they are not given an attribution. Or often, but sometimes we do have his name, but I guess that's why his name is not so familiar. But this does remind me of the Larry David, where the guy donates the wing of the hospital anonymously, but then he goes around telling everybody he's anonymous. So here we go. Rabbi Menachem, he's anonymous. Okay, he agreed with that original formulation of the baraita. Chamim disagree and say that if she commits adultery, she does not lose her worn out clothing, and that's what Rav Nachman and Rav Huna also said, and that's also what this baraita said. So most opinions say that she keeps that clothing. The next part of the Mishnah, which is the last one we're going to analyze, and then we will complete this perek, said imetechila nesa'as, regarding the Ailonit, that if the man married her knowing that she is an Ailonit, then he cannot claim that this is a a marriage based on false premises. Rather, he would have to give the ketubah in that case. Amar Rav Huna, Ailonit isha ve'ena isha, almana isha gemura. So Rav Huna says in Ailonit, okay, we should not take this, translate isha as woman here, because then it would mean an Ailonit is a woman and not a woman. Now, although it's true that the Ailonit has some a deep voice and is underdeveloped, but she is in fact a woman for all matters. Rather, the word isha here we have to translate as a wife. An Ailonit is a wife and is not a wife, meaning depending on the exact circumstances, either she will be considered a wife and married, he has to pay ketubah, or not a wife. We'll see what that is. Whereas an almana, isha gemara, she is fully a wife no matter what. If a Kohen Gadol marries an almana, that the marriage is complete. So what does that mean? This is all Rav Huna saying this. Ailonit isha ve'ena isha hikirba yesh la ketubah. Lo hikirba en la ketubah. For an Ailonit, it depends. If he knew before the marriage that she will not be able to bear children, that she's an Ailonit, then he has to, and then he divorces her. He has to pay ketubah because he knew it. But if he did not know at the time, so he thought he's marrying a childbearing woman, and turns out she's not, so then he can say this is based on false pretenses, and so then he does not have to pay the ketubah. So she is a wife, and sometimes is not a wife. Almana isha gemura ben hikirba ben lo hikirba yesh la ketubah. Whereas a Kohen Gadol, it doesn't matter. She is who marries an almana. She is fully his wife, whether he knew beforehand that she is an almana, or even if he didn't know that she is an almana. I guess she didn't tell him that. Oh, by the way, I was married and my wife died and my husband died. Nevertheless, he has to pay a ketubah. Presumption is that if a man knew that his wife was an Ailonit, he wouldn't have married in the first place. But if a Kohen Gadol knew that this woman is an almana, he may have very well married her anyway. And so, therefore, we don't call that a mekach ta'ut. So he has to pay the ketubah. That is all the opinion of Rav Huna, who makes a distinction. Rav Yehuda Omer, Rav Yehuda does not make a distinction. He says, achad zo, isha ve'ena isha, both an Ailonit and an almana are sometimes a wife and sometimes not a wife. Hi kirba yesh ketubah, lo kirba en la ketubah. For both of them, if the husband knew, the Kohen Gadol knew that she was an almana, then he would have to pay the ketubah because he married her knowing that. But if he did not know, then the Kohen Gadol, like the husband of the Ailonit, can say, I didn't know she was almana. I wouldn't have married her as knowing that. So therefore, he can say false pretenses, and he does not pay a ketubah. Okay, we're going to have a challenge against Rav Huna. And it's going to be a successful challenge. Metibe. Kenasa becheskat shehi ken, v'nimsat shehi ken, yesh la ketubah. Regarding an almana, if a Kohen Gadol marries her assuming that she is an almana, and it turns out that she is in fact an almana, so he pays the ketubah. So it sounds like he only pays the ketubah if he knew that she was an almana and she was an almana. But hasetama and la ketubah. In any other case, if he married her not knowing either way, not checking into it, then he would not pay a ketubah, because the presumption is that most people are not almana, and so therefore he was assuming that she's not an almana, and that turns out she is, so he doesn't pay a ketubah. So this is going to be a challenge for Rav Huna, who said that only almana, whether he knew or didn't know, he has to pay the ketubah. Here, if he didn't know anything, and certainly if he knew that she was not an almana, certainly he would have to pay, according to Rav Huna. And here it says that if he doesn't know, he doesn't have to pay. So lo tema hasetama en la ketubah. We'll try to answer for Rav Huna and say, no, don't make an inference from this baraita that since the baraita said only if it's for sure he knew she was an almana and she's an almana, therefore she has a ketubah. But if he doesn't know anything, then doesn't have a ketubah. No, don't make the inference to that extent. Rather say, if he married her on the assumption that she is not an almana, in other words, the therefore would be only if he married her knowing she's an almana, and she is an almana, then he has to pay the ketubah. But if he married her assuming that she is not an almana, and turns out she is an almana, then he does not have to pay the ketubah. In other words, the only case where the husband would not have to pay ketubah, according to this inference, is if she totally tricked him. She said, I am not an almana, and it turns out she is an almana. So then, no. Aval setamamai itla. But if she said nothing, then you would have to pay ketubah. So if we make this smaller inference from the Braita, then maybe we can reconcile it with Rav Huna, who also said that he always has to pay ketubah. Always meaning whether he knew for sure that she was an almana, or if it was with setam, she didn't say anything, also he would have to pay. Although you're right, if she says, I'm not an almana, and she turns out it is, then he wouldn't have to pay. So maybe we could reconcile it, but we say this is not a good reading of the Mishnah for two reasons. Number one, says, why would the Baraita bother to teach us the case where he assumed that she is an almana and she is an almana? In fact, that's when she has a ketubah. If it was true that when she says nothing, and it turns out she is an almana, he also has to pay, then he should have said only that case, and then I would have known for sure. If in a case where she says nothing, he has to pay, all the more so when she says, I am an almana, for sure she would have to pay. So the Mishnah should have given the bigger chidush. Ve'od taneh kenasa biyadua, v'nimset biyadua, yesh ketubah, kenasa stam en ketubah, tiyubta de Rav Huna. And furthermore, the language of the Mishnah is very clear. It's talking about a case where he married her with knowing for sure that she has this problem. She's an almana, and it's fine, and they find out, yes, in fact, this is true. That's when he has to pay the ketubah. But the Mishnah is only talking about cases of for knowing for sure, and does not address cases of setam when she doesn't say anything. And so therefore, we have to assume that is en la ketubah. And so really, this Baraita is a contradiction, a refutation of the opinion of Rav Huna. Now, what led Rav Huna to say what he said? Rav Huna matnitin at aite. Well, he was misled by the language of the Mishnah. Hu savar mideka maflig ba'ilonit vela kamaflig be'almana miklad amana afilu b'stamad name it la velahi. The Mishnah, it mentioned the three women who don't get a ketubah, but then it only singled out the ailonit as the exception, that if he knew from the beginning of the marriage, before the marriage, that she's an ailonit, then he does have to pay ketubah. But almana to Kohen Gadol is mentioned in the very last clause of the Mishnah, the deoraita prohibitions, and there it doesn't make any distinction. It doesn't single out the almana to say only if he didn't know. It doesn't matter. Even if she didn't say, no one said anything, he would still have to pay that ketubah. So that's why Rav Huna thought that there's a distinction between the alonit, where the Mishnah does make an explicit exception, and almana, where the Mishnah does not. Velohi, but that's actually not true. Ki katani la La'almana apilutad ailonit ka'eh. In fact, when the Mishnah goes on after the ailonit exception to talk about almana, it was continuing that same idea. And so just like there is a distinction for ailonit, the Mishnah is going on, and also for almana, the same distinction would apply. If the Kohen Gadol knew that she is an almana before, then he would have to pay a ketubah. But if he knew that she was if he thought that she was not an almana, and it turns out, oh, I tricked you, I am an almana, in that case, in fact, he would not have to pay. That is the proper interpretation of the Mishnah according to Rav Yehuda, so that we can reconcile it with the Baraita. Hadran alach almana nizonet. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen v'amen.